How to Read Poetry Like a Professor by Thomas C. Foster.
Chapter 11, Shapes of Things to Come. One of the most demoralizing prospects for a reader is page after page of unbroken verse. We see several hundred lines marching down the pages without even the saving grace of a paragraph break, and our hearts just sink. Okay, my heart sinks. I know this because for years I confronted the Iliad at least once a year, and for all that I liked except the experience, getting started on each of those books that crept up near 1,000 lines was almost more than I could bear. But it was ultimately okay, because the nature of epic narrative is such that one really doesn't have to lean in hard on analysis. Lyric poems now are a different proposition. What are the alternatives to walls of unbroken verse? Stanzas, strophes, verse paragraphs. By stanza, we mean a grouping of lines that will be repeated throughout a poem or section of a longer poem. Strophe and verse paragraph are largely interchangeable terms that indicate the number of lines may change from one group of lines to the next. Let's start with the regular one. First, a question. How long is a stanza? Well, how long do you need it to be? For practical purposes, the utility of a stanza seems to break down after 10 lines or so. Since I never shy away from pushing things to their illogical extreme, what good would it do to have a 1,000-line stanza? In epic poems, that would be called a book, and repeating that precise number of lines would be meaningless, since who would bother to count them? At the other end of the spectrum, a one-line stanza is equally useless, since it allows for no pattern. So, between greater than one and fewer than many, what configurations make enough sense to actually occur in nature? Moving from smaller to larger, we have couplets. Couplets are not often set off as stanzas of their own, but they have been much loved at various times in literary history, particularly in the 18th century of John Dryden, Alexander Pope, and Jonathan Swift. Rhyming couplets are also favored among purveyors of comic verse in most periods. Tercet, 3 lines, the most famous of which is terza rima. They can have other uses, but Dante has largely dictated how they will appear. Their other important use is in the villanelle form, as we have seen. Quatrain, 4 lines, with a variety of rhyme scheme, the most common being ABAB and ABBA. Since it is the nearly perfect length for conveying a single thought, it is probably the most used stanza form. Quintain, rarely used as a form, this term is even rarer. 5-line stanzas will commonly contain unrhymed lines, or will carry rhymes from one stanza to the next. The lack of symmetry, which seems to be an impediment, can sometimes be liberating. Sestet, 6 lines, reasonably common, and not only for sonnets. Sestets can be employed as simply as the equivalent of paragraphs in a long poem, or the constituent element in the sestina, as we saw in the previous chapter. Rhyme royal, 7 lines, first used by Geoffrey Chaucer in several poems, notably Troilus and Cresseide. The rhyme scheme is AB, ABB, CC, and it can appear as a single stanza or 2 stanzas, ABA, BB, CC, or even 3, ABA, BB, CC. Octave. When speaking of sonnets, ottavo rima is the most common term, and it had a specific rhyme scheme, AB, 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 CC. With the couplet after 3 alternating rhymes, the form lends itself to punctuating statements, which has made it a favorite of mock heroic poems. As the name suggests, this one came via Italy, specifically from Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron, whose concept Chaucer would borrow for the Canterbury Tales. Other versions of the 8-line stanza exist, but this is the famous one. Spenserian stanza, 9 lines. Edmund Spenser's gift to English verse that isn't the Fairy Queen, although it was first employed there. There are 3 features of note. First, the rhyme scheme is AB, ABB, CB, CC, so things interlock somewhat. Second, the stanza is written in our very good friend iambic pentameter, except third, the 9th line, which is iambic hexameter, 6 feet rather than 5, called an Alexandrine. It has been used by a number of other poets, including most of the British Romantics, but it is sufficiently uncommon that I never suspect its existence when I see more than 4 or 5 lines grouped together. It sneaks up on me. 10-line stanza and beyond. They can occur, but they are sufficiently rare that no one has bothered to come up with a name, or have, but it hasn't caught on. Beyond here, there be monsters. Each sort of regular stanza has a set of practices, precepts, or outright rules that govern its practice. Once someone, a Spencer, say, introduces a novel form, his version becomes the standard. The quatrain has escaped this fate largely because it is so ubiquitous that no one progenitor can lay claim to it. The poetic canon is therefore pretty well split among the various available rhyme configurations, which is just another way of saying it's all been done before. But what about divisions that are irregular? We call those strophes, or verse paragraphs, depending on who is doing the calling. Strophe comes from odes, which in turn come from Greek drama's choral odes. Typically, the chorus engaged in a back and forth both literally and figuratively. As it debated a point and moved in one direction and chanted the strophe. Then, having reached its endpoint, it moved to the opposite direction and gave out the antistrophe. Sometimes this toing and froing would repeat. Other times a resolution of sorts would be reached, and that was known as an epode. So, strophe, antistrophe, epode. Epody? For some reason, students resist strophe in favor of stanza, which is too bad. Strophe gets you off the hook for any expectations that the second one will precisely resemble the first. I, for one, appreciate any term that offers me wiggle room, of which I need all I can get. What happens when stanzas don't look like, well, stanzas? When we hear stanza, we have an image of a block of text, a sort of black rectangle occupying a chunk of the white page. But that need not be the case. A stanza structure can be perfectly regular, not in itself, but in the repetition within a poem, as Marianne Moore illustrates in the poem we glanced at earlier. The fish, wade through black jade, of the crow blue mussel shells one keeps, adjusting the ash heaps, opening and shutting itself like an injured fan. The barnacles which encrust the side of the wave cannot hide, there for the submerged shafts of the sun, split like spun glass, move themselves with spotlight swiftness into the crevices, in and out illuminating the turquoise sea of bodies. The water drives a wedge of iron through the iron edge of the cliff whereupon the stars, pink rice grains, ink bespattered jellyfish, crabs like green, lilies and submarine toadstools slide each on the other. All external marks of abuse are present on this defiant edifice. All the physical features of accident, lack of cornice, dynamite grooves, burns, and hatchet strokes. These things stand out on it. The chasm side is dead, repeated. Evidence has proved that it can live on what cannot revive its youth. The sea grows old in it. You will notice immediately that the stanzas have a distinct appearance. When we see four-sided block of stanzas, we kind of know what to do with them. But not so with Miss Moore's fishy verse. We have to figure out some new strategy. Not that it's hard. The stanza pattern is quite rigid, 5 lines in each other, with the first 2 lines rhyming with each other, as do the third and fourth. What, you didn't notice? That's the wildly different line length tricking your eye. The 2 things are true about Moore's titles. 1, they often act as the first word or words of the poem and lead into the thing that seems to be the beginning. And 2, they may have very little to do with the actual subject under discussion. An octopus, for instance, is really about a glacier with 8 arms that she saw described in a National Park Service brochure as an octopus of ice. That description seems to have led to the thought, you know, that's a perfect way to mislead my readers. Part of the fun of a Moore poem is getting disabused of our incorrect assumptions, or at least it is for her fans, of which I am one. Your mileage may vary. That playfulness extends to her stanza construction. She's quite serious about the rules she sets for herself in this poem, but that doesn't mean she needs to seem serious. Here is the 7th and penultimate stanza. accident, lack of cornice, dynamite grooves, burns, and hatchet strokes. These things stand out on it. The chasm side is dead. No, it is not customary to achieve one's syllabic ends by hyphenating words. On the other hand, there is no rule against it. Plus, it's just funny, as is ending the previous stanza with of. How many lines, much less stanzas, of poetry end with of? I'm not coming up with a lot of instances off the top of my head. One more element that makes Moore such a rare bird. It is important, however, to note that she is doing this irregular thing in the service of play and humor. She does it because it's funny. And, after all, why expend all that energy to come up with something new if it doesn't please you?